I never thought that at 62 years old, I'd be sitting in a bank office in Cleveland, signing away the house I spent nearly 40 years paying off. My hands were shaking as I held a cheap Bank of America pen, and for a moment I thought my chest might give out. I didn't do it because I'm stupid. I did it because of a phone call at 2 in the morning from my only son. Dad, if I don't come up with the money this week, they're going to take my house. I'll lose everything. His voice cracked, and in the background I could hear the wind howling through the old drafty windows of his downtown apartment. Cleveland winters cut you straight to the bone, and I pictured my son sitting there, head in his hands, cold and desperate. Mark, he used to be my whole world. I divorced his mother when he was 13, and from then on it was just the two of us. I worked as a mechanic, pulling $24 an hour, crawling under cars until my back felt like it was on fire. Every night I'd slap on one of those cheap heat patches from Walgreens just to sleep. But I saved. I always saved. When he wanted to go on a school trip to Washington, D.C., I sold my father's stamp collection to cover the $300 fee. I never hesitated when it came to him. But last year he got caught up in crypto. Thought he'd strike it rich. He maxed out his credit cards, even pawned his car, convinced he could beat the market. When it all crashed, he was left staring at $180,000 in debt. I didn't find out until those red warning envelopes started piling up on his kitchen table. He'd flash a half smile and say, "Don't worry, Dad, I've got a plan." The only plan he really had was leaning on my sense of duty. So there I was, in that sterile bank office, with a young loan officer, she couldn't have been more than 30, looking me dead in the eye. "You understand, sir, once you sign this, your house isn't safe anymore." My heart sank. That house in the suburbs, the one where I built the front porch with my own hands, the one with pencil marks still on the kitchen doorway from when I measured Mark's height every year, was about to be collateral for his mess. Still, I signed, because family is supposed to be there for each other. And if I didn't save him, who would? When I walked out of the bank, the steps were already covered in fresh snow. The air stung my face, but inside I felt a strange mix of pride and shame. I told myself I'd done the right thing, that he would finally understand what his old man meant to him. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But deep down, I heard a warning in my gut, like the creak of the porch roof whenever the wind blows too hard. Something telling me this wasn't going to end the way I hoped. A few days later, still buried under paperwork and overdue bills of my own, Mark called me again. His voice was bright, upbeat, completely different from the broken man who'd begged me for help just nights earlier. "Dad, don't forget my birthday this weekend. I'm throwing a big party for my 33rd. I've got a surprise planned for everyone I froze." He was throwing a party? After I'd just bailed him out of nearly $200,000 in debt? After I'd put my house on the line for him? My chest tightened. Was this surprise going to be him thanking me in front of everyone, showing he was finally proud to have me as his father? Or was it something else? Something I couldn't yet put my finger on? When I hung up the phone, my hand was cold, almost numb, as if the wind off Lake Erie had swept straight through me. And in that moment, I realized this birthday party wasn't going to be just another celebration. It was going to be the start of the worst nightmare of my life. I showed up at the restaurant that Saturday night, dressed in my best. Though best for me was just a clean flannel shirt and an old Carhartt coat. It was one of those upscale steakhouses downtown, the kind with dim lighting, waiters in black vests, and bottles of Napa Valley wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill at Walmart. As soon as I walked in, I felt out of place. Mark's friends were all there, young, successful-looking men in tailored suits, women in designer dresses. They were laughing, clinking glasses, trading stories about real estate deals and weekend trips to Florida. And then there was me, standing at the edge of the room, the only man with gray hair and calloused hands, looking like I'd just walked out of a garage. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here for them. I was here for my son, for the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike in our cul-de-sac, for the man whose debt I had just wiped away with my own blood and sweat. Maybe tonight would be the night he finally acknowledged me. Maybe he would tell everyone the truth, that if it weren't for me, he'd be out in the street. Dinner was loud. Plates of ribeye steaks were carried out, glasses filled and refilled. I barely touched my food, watching Mark at the head of the table. He was beaming, laughing like a man without a care in the world, not a trace of the desperation I'd heard in his voice days before. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something twist in my gut. Then it came. The toast. Mark stood, glass in hand, the whole table turning to him. He cleared his throat, smiling big. And then, with a dramatic flourish, he said the words that would carve into me like a knife. Here's to freedom. Here's to starting fresh, debt-free, owing nothing to anyone. And here's to doing it all without a father holding me back. Because honestly, I don't even have one. Laughter. Some clapped. Others glanced nervously at me as if waiting for me to laugh too, but I didn't. I sat there frozen, the wine in my glass untouched, my hands trembling under the table. My own son had just erased me with a single sentence. I excused myself quietly, walked out into the cold night. The snow was falling hard, the city lights blurred behind the curtain of white. I stood on the curb, watching my breath fog in the air, replaying his words over and over. I don't even have a father. You know what stung the most? That line had been rehearsed. He'd planned it. That surprise he promised me on the phone, it wasn't gratitude. It was humiliation. He wanted to stand tall in front of his friends, to rewrite his story without me in it, and I had bankrolled the whole performance. Walking away from that restaurant, I felt two things at once: the deepest wound I'd ever carried, and a strange, icy calm settling in my chest. It was as if part of me had died right there on East 4th Street, but another part had woken up, one that was no longer willing to be silent. A memory hit me then, sharp and sudden, his mother's voice on the phone a week before. Don't think he'll be grateful. He's always felt like you held him back. I'd brushed it off as bitterness. Now, standing in the snow, I realized she'd been telling me the truth. I drove home that night with the radio off, my mind racing. Every mile on I-90 I kept asking myself, why had I given up everything? My savings, my house, my peace, just to be spat on? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickering against the snowdrifts, I felt something shift inside me. For 62 years, I'd been the man who sacrificed, who bent over backward, who swallowed his pride for the sake of family. But maybe it was time to be someone else. Maybe it was time to stop saving him and start saving myself. I stepped inside, hung up my coat, and sat down at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the groan of the old furnace. On the table were the bank papers, the ones with his signature on the loan documents, the fine print I hadn't paid much attention to at the time. I pulled them closer, my eyes scanning line by line, and that's when I saw it, something I'd overlooked, something that made my heart jolt. My name wasn't listed as the debtor. I was the guarantor, which meant the debt wasn't mine at all. It was his. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter smile creeping across my face. He thought he'd erased me with a toast. He thought I was nothing, but he had just handed me the one weapon that could destroy him completely. And in that moment, under the yellow glow of the kitchen light, I knew my revenge was only just beginning. That night after the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of my old house, replaying Mark's toast over and over in my head. I don't even have a father. It wasn't just a careless line. It was deliberate, rehearsed. He had meant for me to hear it, meant for me to feel it, and he'd meant for everyone else to laugh. That was the part I couldn't shake. He didn't just erase me. He mocked me. By dawn, I was at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of me. Bank documents, loan agreements, tax forms. I traced each line, each signature, and then I found it again, the detail I'd overlooked in my panic. The debt wasn't mine. It was his. I was only the guarantor. If he defaulted, the bank could come after my house. But legally, the responsibility stayed squarely on his shoulders. That realization hit me like a jolt of cold water. All this time, I'd been thinking I'd chained myself to his mistake. But in truth, I was holding the very chain that bound him. Still, part of me wavered. He was my son, flesh and blood. A voice inside whispered, maybe he's just young. Maybe he'll come around. Don't destroy him. But another voice, one I'd never listened to before, answered, and what about you? Haven't you already destroyed yourself enough for him? I tried to push it aside, went about my day like normal. Drove to the hardware store, picked up some groceries at Giant Eagle. But everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. Or maybe it was in my head. Maybe I was imagining the way people looked, the way they whispered. Because by then, I'd started to notice something else. Mark wasn't hiding. He was bragging. I heard from an old coworker, his nephew had been at the party. Word was spreading fast. Mark had told people he'd pulled himself out of debt with smart investing. No mention of me. No mention of the house I'd put on the line. He was rewriting history, and in his version, I didn't exist. The betrayal burned deeper with each retelling. And that's when the idea came. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to confront him in some screaming match. No, I could do what I'd always done. Quiet work, meticulous, step by step. Only this time, the work wouldn't save him. It would hold him accountable. That night, I opened the old cedar chest in my living room. Inside were manila folders. Every receipt, every email, every scrap of paper tied to the loans and transfers. I'd kept them out of habit, thinking maybe someday I'd need proof for taxes. Now I realized this was my arsenal. And here's where the first twist landed hard, something I hadn't even expected myself. In those papers, I found not just debts, but forged documents. Applications Mark had signed using my name, pretending to have my authorization. He hadn't just relied on me, he'd stolen from me. My stomach turned as I read them, my own shaky signature copied clumsily on the dotted line. He had crossed a line far worse than debt. He had committed fraud, and he had dragged my name into it. Suddenly, the humiliation at the party was the least of my problems. If the wrong person saw these papers, I could be implicated right alongside him. And that's when the icy calm returned. Because buried in those same documents was my salvation. Timestamps, bank emails, and account numbers that proved exactly what he'd done and exactly how he'd done it. I could clear my name and end his. I sat there for hours, the furnace rattling in the background, weighing the choice. To turn him in would be to lose him forever. To stay silent would be to risk losing myself, my house, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. By the time the clock hit midnight, I knew there was no middle ground. Mark had erased me in public, forged my name in private, and left me holding the bag. The only question left was how I'd make my move. I closed the cedar chest, locked it, and placed the key in my pocket. As I did, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Mark, just 4 words. Need more help, Dad? I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly steady, my heart strangely quiet. Because what he didn't know was that the next time he asked me for help would be the last time he ever did. The text from Mark, need more help, Dad, wasn't a plea. It was a demand. That's what cut the deepest. He didn't see me as a father. He saw me as a safety net, a wallet, a tool. And the sick part? For 30 years I'd let him. Not anymore. I went to work quietly, the way I always had. The same patience that once kept engines running would now dismantle my son's lies. I spent days combing through the folders, cross-checking dates, highlighting discrepancies. Each discovery tightened the knot in my chest. The forged signatures, the fake business loan applications, the shady wire transfers to gambling sites registered overseas. It was all there, buried in the paperwork I'd once thought was harmless. But I wasn't just gathering evidence for me. I was setting the stage for him. I started with the IRS. I mailed in a packet thick enough to choke a shredder, detailing every false claim, every hidden transaction. Then I contacted the bank's fraud department, handing them proof of the forged applications. I didn't sign my name at first. I sent it anonymously, testing the waters. But it didn't take long before the phone calls started coming, investigators wanting to speak with me directly. And here's the first twist. The more I cooperated, the more I realized I wasn't the one in danger. Those forged documents I'd feared would trap me. They actually exonerated me. The timestamps, the IP addresses, they all pointed straight back to him. Mark had been sloppy, arrogant, assuming no one would ever look too closely. For once, his arrogance was my shield. The process was slow, but I could feel the ground shifting under him. His accounts started freezing. His business associates began pulling back. And though he didn't know it was me behind the curtain, he could sense something was wrong. He called more often now, voice strained, asking if I'd heard anything or seen any letters in the mail. I played dumb. Nope, nothing here. Every lie I told him felt like a small repayment for every lie he'd told me. But revenge isn't just about punishment, it's about timing, and I was saving the real blow for last. One evening I drove down to the courthouse, a folder on the passenger seat. Inside were the documents proving he'd forged my signature. It was enough not just to ruin him financially, but to land him in prison. I sat there in the parking lot for nearly an hour, the heater humming, my breath fogging the windshield as I wrestled with myself. He was my son, my only son. Could I really hand him over to the law? That's when the second twist hit. I remembered the loan officer's warning. Once you sign this, your house isn't safe anymore. At the time, I'd thought she meant I could lose everything. But now I understood the other meaning. Because of that signature, I had the legal standing to expose him. The house wasn't just collateral. It was leverage. If I stayed silent, the bank could still come for me. But if I spoke, if I made the first move, I could protect myself and watch him fall by his own hand. I carried the folder inside, spoke with the clerk, signed my name. By the time I walked back to the car, the die was cast. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes began to fall faster. A federal investigator showed up at my door, asking questions about Mark's gambling debts. His face, his voice, his life were under a microscope. And still, he kept calling me, angrier now, demanding answers. Dad, something's going on. I need you to fix it. I need you to back me up. But the days of backing him up were over. The final twist came late one night, when I got a letter from the court. Mark wasn't just under investigation, he was being summoned to appear, and I had been listed as a witness. I sat there with the letter in my hand, the weight of it pressing into my chest. After all the years of silence, all the years of sacrifice, my voice would finally be heard. And when he saw me on that witness stand, calm and steady, he would know exactly who had pulled the rug out from under him. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was that he wasn't going down quietly. Because the very next night, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, Mark was standing there, his eyes wild, his fists clenched, and he said 4 words that froze my blood. You ruined my life. When I opened the door and saw Mark standing there, his fists balled and his face twisted with rage, I knew the mask had finally slipped. He wasn't here as a son looking for reconciliation. He was here as a man cornered, a man about to lose everything, and he wanted someone to blame. You ruined my life, he spat, his voice low but shaking. I didn't flinch. For 62 years I'd bent, bowed, and swallowed my pride, but not anymore. I stood in the doorway, the warm light of my kitchen behind me, and said the words I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest. No, Mark, you ruined it yourself. For a moment, he just glared, breathing hard, snowflakes clinging to his hair. Then he pushed past me, storming into the house like he still owned it. His eyes darted to the cedar chest in the corner, the one where I'd kept all the files. And here came the twist I'd half expected. He lunged for it, yanking at the lock. He knew. He knew that chest held the evidence that would sink him. He wasn't here for me. He was here to destroy the one thing still tying him to the truth. But what he didn't know was that the chest was empty. I had already handed every document, every forged signature, every record to the investigators. What sat in that box now was nothing but old photos, snapshots of him as a boy, smiling on Christmas morning, holding up a Little League trophy, proof of a son I once had, a son long gone. When he saw the photographs, his face changed. For just a second, the fury slipped, replaced by something else, confusion, maybe even shame. He held one picture, the two of us fishing on Lake Erie, him barely 10 years old, holding up a perch with that goofy grin. His lips trembled, but the anger returned just as quickly. He crumpled the photo in his hand and threw it to the floor. "You think this makes you better than me?" he hissed. I looked at him, my voice steady. "No, son. It just makes me free." The next morning he was served. A court summons, delivered right to his apartment. Fraud, tax evasion, gambling violations, the works. And when the trial came, I sat in the witness stand, calm as stone, while the prosecutors laid out every detail. The forged documents, the hidden accounts, the lies. Mark tried to spin it, said I was framing him, said I was jealous of his success. But the evidence spoke louder than either of us. And when the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just sat there, staring at the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, now a man in handcuffs being led away. The final twist was one he never saw coming. He thought he could erase me with words, erase me with lies. Instead, it was his own arrogance that erased him. His friends stopped calling. His mother didn't even show up to the trial. His name was printed in the Cleveland Plain Dealer under the headline, "Local Man Convicted of Fraud." He wanted freedom, a life without a father. Well, he got it. But freedom behind bars isn't the kind he imagined. When it was all over, I went back to my quiet house. I made myself a cup of black coffee, sat on the porch, and listened to the snow melt off the gutters. I felt lighter than I had in years. Not happy. No, happiness wasn't the right word. But whole again. For the first time, I wasn't carrying his weight anymore. And that's the real truth I learned. Sometimes, loving someone means letting them face the ruin they built for themselves. It's a heartbreak I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it's also the only way I found myself again. Have you ever gone through something like that, where the person you sacrificed everything for turned out to be the one who cut you deepest? If you have, I'd like to hear your story down in the comments. And if you want to sit with me through more stories like this, hit subscribe. We'll get through these storms together, one story at a time.